Stigmatization around mental health still exists. In the last several years, there's been an uptick in shared treatment experiences, specifically for those who were in treatment as an adolescent over the last 30 years. As a consultant working with young adults only, it's been unsettling to hear about the horrific experiences that some folks have described. As someone trained as a counselor, we were taught to do no harm. I lead with this for each client I work with. While recording this special parent series, over the last year, several parents have suggested I interview their young adults. The special parent series is noted as being just that. It's about the parent perspective only. I'm now branching out to launch the former participant series, extending the opportunity for former participants who feel comfortable talking about their journey, doing so on this podcast. No topic is off limits, and not all stories are positive. This series is meant to be honest, transparent, and real for each individual's experience through the treatment continuum. Please note that this special former participant series is the adult's perspective of their treatment experience during adolescence or as a young adult. This is merely one perspective of a single story, and it's important to know that names have been changed for the protection of the interviewee unless they have requested not to do so. These episodes may include details surrounding suicide, self-harm, substance abuse, including overdose, hospitalizations, psychotic episodes, and other traumatic experiences which include parts of the treatment journey. That includes working with consultants, being escorted by a transport company, wilderness therapy, and a residential treatment program. All that is to say, listener discretion is advised. Welcome to an episode with a former participant in treatment.
It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. If you're new here, I'm glad to have you. This podcast was formed to collectively build a bank of stories from normal people sharing their non-linear paths. Unfortunately, social media paints a narrow picture of what success looks like, so I'm doing my best to spread the news that changing course is common, and you don't have to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life at 18. If you're a parent worried about your young adult and whether their path is leading them to success, you're in the right place. I'm a therapeutic consultant who works with young adults to connect them with resources that'll help them get back on a better path. So if you're curious, let's chat. You can schedule a free consultation through my website, which you can find the link for in the show notes. Today, my guest is Holly Wilson. As founder and chief empowerment officer, Holly Wilson brings years of experience in the field of mental health and addiction to women's recovery. She has worked in some of the most reputable treatment programs in the country in various roles, including her role as managing director and program director for a nationally renowned dual diagnosis extended care program where she was responsible for the evidence-based development and maintenance of program scheduling for clients, the facility, and staff for residential inpatient, transitional, and sober living. Having an intimate knowledge of the substance abuse recovery world, Holly is a strong advocate for clinically savvy, gender-specific, co-occurring treatment. Holly is deeply committed to the recovery community of Colorado specifically, as well as the professional and personal development of women in the field of mental health. I love sitting down and hearing Holly's story. We definitely chatted about it before, and since I've left Colorado, it was kind of nice to reconnect with her and just having her bring me back to hearing about her personal journey. So let's not wait any longer. Here's Holly. Hi, Holly. Thanks for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you.
I know. I feel like I am missing seeing you and the ladies at Denver Women's Recovery because I don't live in Colorado anymore, but I just felt like I was so connected to you all when I was there. Yeah,
we felt the same way. It was very like-minded and awesome connection, but luckily we still get to work together, so.
Sure do. Well, I'm excited to kind of eventually get to that point of like, how did that even come about? Because obviously that is you, but let's talk about the like backstory. Let's tell our listeners, where did you even grow up? Because I do want to get to the point of like, how did we get on the path that we are on today?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Crested Butte, Colorado, which I know you're very familiar with.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I did. That's why my mom still lives there. So I know you know my mom too, Darlene Egelhoff. yeah, my mom and my stepdad lived there and my brother and his wife. So I'm still back there all the time, but that's where I graduated high school. Obviously, super small town. And I'm a Colorado gal.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up in the best part of the state. I feel like I can say that. We can be biased together. That was like the coolest part of Colorado. All right. So you got to live there, grow up there. What happened after high school?
So I was like, a straight A student, big time overachiever. I was in like every activity and club. I was very like by the book rule follower, oldest daughter, just the total archetype, just very high achieving, high performing type person. And then I actually went to CU Boulder for undergrad. I got a full ride that was part need based and part merit based. So it was called the Governor's Opportunity Scholarship. And so, yeah, I got to go to Boulder. And since that was the free option, I chose that. And then, yeah, I went to Boulder and went from Crested Butte, which was like less than 2,000 people at that time. My graduating class was like 23 kids, to go into Boulder. And I'm like, nobody knows me here. Like when I walk down the street, not everybody knows what I'm doing. So I just I think my whole perfectionist personality just like completely unraveled. It was like all the pressure, everything, just like I felt like I could kind of just be free. And I think I like let a lot of the shadow parts of myself just start like coming out and having fun and partying. And that was like really where I started to drink. I didn't really drink in high school very much because I was like worried about getting in trouble, and every party was busted in Crested Butte, as you can imagine. So yeah, so I got to Boulder and I kind of let loose. And like even my first semester, I got put on academic probation, even though my experience of school in Boulder was like, this is easy compared to high school, like the actual course content. But it was just like a complete swing in the opposite direction of my personality.
Yeah, I'm hearing you talk about the imbalance of all the other areas of your life, like socially, right? Like just really like, well, this is new Holly, new world, new town, new place, do all the things. And hearing you talk about being on academic probation takes me back to a lot of the students that I worked with when I worked in higher ed, which is just like, it's not that you're not academically capable. It's just everything else is spilling over into your academic performance. And as a school, in any school, not just CU Boulder, we have to grade you.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing the work, even if you're capable of doing it, if you're not doing it, it's going to be reflected in your grades. So, okay, what happened? Now all of a sudden you're on probation. Where does this story take us?
Yeah. So I just was like, all right, you were a good student. Like you need to start just showing up to class. And so I was able to get it together. That was my first time of like really swinging hard one way and then figuring out how to kind of draw it back. And I could still pull it together. So I kind of found more of a balance of like, I'm going to show up. I didn't still put in nearly the effort I did in, my earlier academic career, but I did enough to pass. And I started as a psychology major. And then I switched to becoming a film major. And I was like, I got to show up in class and watch movies. Like that is going to be right up my alley. I did start to really, in high school, I had decided I wanted to be a performer. And my goal was to be on Saturday Night Live. Like that was my dream. And so it kind of went in alignment with that. But then I was also like, this is going to be way easier to pass classes. So
it's funny the decisions that we make based on the information that we have.
Yeah. It seemed like a great plan at the time. Like, well, in retrospect, it all still worked out for me. But yeah, it was, I feel like that was kind of the stuff that I was trying on. And still definitely like, I think my early years, a lot of the achieving was a way of kind of like, trying to treat my own trauma and like have control over things. And then I kind of swung to the opposite of like, well, what if I just don't control anything? And I just kind of like let everything loose and feel like I can. And so I think there was like a lot of wisdom looking back on it and just wanting to kind of let some more repressed parts come out and be seen and felt and heard. And it's just like, I never had felt like I could do that in such a small container of a small community.
Yeah. Yeah. No way to hide, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody is watching all the time.
Right.
Okay, so how do we get to like finding the middle ground, right?
Yeah.
Like getting to that balance. We swung so far in the opposite direction. How, like you said, eventually it got easier and it kind of like led you on the path that you're on anyways. But did you graduate with the degree in film? Like what ended up happening?
Yeah, I graduated and I was, holding down jobs and successful. I moved right to LA. I didn't really like LA when I moved out there. I kind of was like, I miss my Colorado people. Like people here seem so transactional. It feels so, surface. And it was more like about achievements. It was like, what can you do for me? What have you done? What's on your resume? And I just like really rejected that inauthenticity that I felt when I first got there. So when I came back to Colorado, I just, started working a normal job and doing film stuff on the side for fun. And then, my stepbrother, he was the same age as me and we were very close. We were planning to move in an apartment together. And then he tragically passed away in a freak accident in Steamboat. He fell off of a roof of the Steamboat Grand Hotel when he was shoveling snow. And he just like had gotten back from serving our country in Afghanistan and Iraq. For the whole time I was in college, he was out doing that. And so it was like just so horrific and sudden that I didn't have the capacity to handle that type of a trauma. And I just then fully dove into drinking. And whereas before I could still pull it back and do what I needed to do, it was like that was the time where it really felt like it just tipped me over the scale. Yeah. And I lost my ability to control my drinking. And so there were a few years there. I went back out to LA. I enjoyed it much more the second time around when I was like in this, state of alcoholism. I also got invited to be on a TV show out there. So I was getting paid and I didn't really have to work. And my persona on the show was kind of known for being somebody who was a drinker. I was called Alcoholic, was like my nickname. So it was like everything in my life started really supporting my problematic drinking. And so that went on for a few years until I kind of just had my own, I'd say rock bottom moment. It, was not anything crazy. I didn't lose a job or have any legal problems, but I just kind of hit a point where I was like, every effort that I'm making I'm not able to move forward and progress. Like I'm just really stuck. And I feel like my priority has been drinking. My priority has been partying and doing like the bare minimum. And so I was just not accomplishing what I wanted to. I took like a writing workshop and I wasn't able to, bring about my final screenplay, which was part of the course. I signed up for improv classes at the Groundlings and I just stopped showing up to that. And so it was kind of just like those moments where it all kind of crashed on me of like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I'm not getting anywhere and this is not who I want to be. So I just I knew friends in LA who had like gone to treatment. And for me, my idea of treatment was like, oh, I'll just like go get in really good shape and I'll take a break from drinking and then I'll be able to come back and I'll know how to like drink normally and like, be able to work and whatever. But when I got to treatment, I just became so aware of all the stuff that was underneath the drink and that it wasn't about that at all for me. Mm-hmm. And that my issues preceded me ever picking up a drink in my life. So it was like just having the experience of going to treatment is really what changed my life and realizing like I had all this stuff that was just buried so deeply within me and all these ways of, maladaptively coping in my life. And alcohol was just like one symptom of that. And so like just showing up as a willing participant, the people who I ended up working for the treatment center where I went in Utah called Ascend Recovery, they all joke because when I got to the door, I drove myself to treatment and I got there and I was like, hi, I'm Holly. And they're all like, cool. Who'd you bring to treatment? Like looking around over my shoulder because they had never seen anybody show up to treatment smiling before. So it was like,
they're like, we'll take your keys.
Yeah. So I did 60 days of inpatient treatment and it totally changed my life. And I didn't plan on not drinking again or whatever. I didn't really know what to expect, but I just was ready and understood what they were saying. It all fit for me and I was ready to do the work. And I just started to feel so much better. So I just was like, okay, I'll keep it going, and I took all their suggestions. I stayed in Utah to do sober living, which I didn't know that I'd have to do more stuff. It was like, oh, I have to keep doing this. Like, so I can't just start drinking like a lady now. Like, it just was all this stuff. But I was like, I wanted to keep it going for a year and just see how it goes. And then at a year, I could start working. That was like the requirement at the time of sobriety. So I started working at the treatment center where I went as like a psych tech, driving the druggy buggy to meetings and sleeping over with the clients overnight. And, I just loved it. I just thought it was so cool. And I had gotten so much back in my life, and I had been able to uncover so many parts of myself that I had disowned. And it was just the beginning, so I just wanted to keep it going. And so I ended up working there for several years and eventually became their program director.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know parts like this I'm just learning so much about you. I did not know this part of your story, but I'm going to go out on a limb as somebody, again, that's lived on the Front Range and in the mountains of Colorado, that at a certain point, Colorado is calling you back home, right?
Yes.
Like Utah has been very helpful for me for this part of my journey, right? Like you just said, like I'm rediscovering parts of myself and like, parts that I was avoiding that needed to be addressed. And now I'm at a place where it's like, and where do I want to go next? I imagine that you were ready to return.
Yeah. I mean, I was planning on it when I got to treatment. And then when they were ready to discharge me, they were like, what's your plan? I was like, I'm going to just go home back to Colorado where my family is. And they're like, yeah, from what you've told us, like your friends also kind of drink a lot. So we're going to recommend you stay here for a little bit with your community and do sober living. And at that time, they said I could do their aftercare program free and work with my primary therapist for a full year if I kept coming to the aftercare group. And so I was like, all right, I'll do that. But once again, it's like, for me, my experience has been like, the more I get, the more I kind of see how much more there is that I can like get to, I guess, like more freedom that I can have in my life. And so I just kind of kept it going. But yeah, the whole time I wanted to go home. And as I started working there, I felt like I could start to be more, I could embrace more of the truth for me. Like some of the things that I felt resistant to in treatment is I liked a lot of AA. I didn't like a lot of the messaging that to me felt a little bit shaming. Like, somebody goes in the meeting and is like, we're all liars and we're all cheats and, we're all drunks and this and that. And it's just kind of like, things like that never really resonated as much for me. Or like messaging that was like, well, your best thinking got you here. So like, you need to listen to us. And I'm kind of like, I feel like I have a lot of wisdom and a lot to offer. And I have done a lot of things in my life. Like there were a lot of pieces where I felt like sobriety was asking me to disavow and cast out parts of me that, again, I didn't really feel like was authentic to my recovery experience. And so starting in treatment, I started to get the idea of like, I would love to have a women's program. And I would love to just like come from this wholly empowering, client-centered place where it's like, you actually have done a lot of great stuff. And even the use of substances has wisdom in it that like, maybe it's not what works for you ultimately, just like it didn't work for me, because what I needed that I thought I could get from alcohol, I could get in a different way that was more profound and lasting and didn't have the repercussions that I got with alcohol. But the desire had wisdom in it, And so that was where I started cooking the idea of like, I want to have my own treatment center one day and I want to become a clinician. And I had enough of that achiever in me that had run businesses, that had, as mostly as an administrative assistant, that was kind of like part of my job was I worked for CEOs in different capacities over the years. So I knew a lot of stuff organizationally, which is why I got promoted to be the program director at Ascend. It's like the accreditation stuff, HR, hiring, structuring, like that stuff was always natural for me. So when I moved back to Colorado, I was pregnant. And so I said, I'm going to go back to graduate school and do an online program while I stay at home with my baby for the first couple of years. And so, unbeknownst to me, my husband, he ended up getting in a situation where he wasn't able to stay with our family, and he struggled with his own mental health issues. And so I kind of was there, now just enrolled in graduate school with student loans and a baby, a newborn baby. So I was like, oh no, like, what am I going to do now? I have to work, And so I had to find a job. And so I thought to myself, well, I know how to do the admin. I'm learning the clinical, which, I really wanted more just like that kind of scaffolding of the clinical, knowing a lot as a client and then having worked with so many clients, but just, more of the structure of clinical work. And then the last piece I thought that I would need was kind of that front end marketing piece. So I was like, I'll try to get a job working as a marketer, because then I can have that experience and I can start networking in Colorado. So eventually when I start my program, I'll have all the aspects kind of covered and move toward that. So even in my, most disorganized chaos in sobriety, I still had a plan, I still had this big dream that I was working toward. And so I did get a job. I was working at a psych hospital here that's part of like a really big, it's actually the largest network of psych hospitals in the world. So they had a lot of like structured training for marketing and outreach. And so I learned a lot there and made a lot of contacts. And one of those contacts had started another treatment program here. And I kind of just was always telling people like, this is what I want to do one day. This is my dream one day. And this person was like, well, why don't you just do it? And I was like, yeah, well, I am in grad school. I have a baby. Like, I think I'll wait till things get a little bit easier. And he's like, it's never going to get easier. There'll never be an easy time. You should just do it, and gave me the big push. And so I am really grateful that I got that push, because I was like, all right, this is my sign from the universe. I'm just going to go for it. And yeah, I started a very smaller version of what we have now, with one sober living house and one office, and, got like 3 clients right away, and then 6. And everybody, by the way, told me I was crazy for starting a women's program. They're like, there's no women in treatment. Like, how are you going to have a whole program sustained with just women? And I just was like, I don't know, but I want to do it. And yeah.
Anytime anybody questions, like, how can you make this work? My immediate thought is, you don't see the vision. You didn't experience what I experienced. And it takes me back to your comment where you're like, when you were at Ascend and you're like, I want to start a women's, based on these experiences, these little like friction points of your recovery. You're like, but it needs to be for women, and here's how it needs to be different, and like, build it and they will come, right? Yeah. Like, there are women that want exactly what you're trying to put together. And so I think you clearly proved the naysayers wrong by demonstrating that women actually do not just want to go to treatment, but they need treatment, and they want gender specific. They want it to be, different.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that was part of it too. So like in the beginning, I really didn't have a lot of people like pouring in the doors, right? And that was part of, what I think is also important about success was like, well, where are the women then? And I knew, I'd always heard from the studies, the incidence rate is the same in men and women for substance use disorder problems, right? So why are there so many more men in treatment? And when we really looked at the research, we were like, okay, I think that most people, including myself, kind of had this step down mindset of how treatment should be, where it's like, first you go to detox, then you go to res, then you go to PHP, then you go to all the way down. And that was really what I noticed. So I was like, that barrier is huge for women, because like myself, once again, I could use my own experience of like, well, I still had a job, I still was able to maintain my relationships. I still had all these things that I could keep going on, but I was still suffering. And I might not have met criteria for detox at that time. I don't know, especially with what I was self-reporting, so that was part of it for me. I my clinical director at the time and I were kind of like, well, what if we're going about this wrong? What if instead of a step down program, we try to be a step up program? And we're trying to look for the women who are gutting it out, who are still able to show up and put their makeup on and look like they're fine and are still managing their families, but dying on the inside. Like, why do you have to wait until your whole entire life has fallen apart to get help? You actually don't. And there's no reason why we think about things this way. And I do think the whole industry has really shifted in that regard. But once I thought to myself of like, oh, hey, people don't have to wait to hit rock bottom to get help for substances. That is actually when we started to explode with clients, because, and some of them were just, sure, they could have definitely started at detox. And when they get in with us and they build rapport and they start being honest and they feel empowered and respected, some of those people were able to move to that level because we built that trust with them and they're able to finally be honest. But other people, it's like, they're actually great to start at this level of care because they are sustaining their life. They do meet criteria to have IOP be an entry level of care. So it was really cool to, and this is my favorite part of having a business. It's like, it's just constantly looking at all the different elements that play into how can we be more helpful? How can we create more accessibility for people? How do we meet our clients where they're at truly and be at 100% a client-centered program and like break free of kind of some of the, constructed ideas that are binding us to something that isn't really meeting the needs of these women.
Yeah. And it's hard to have to hold all of those pieces, which is to actually be in the helping space, right? To have the clinical knowledge, what do people need? But then to be the entrepreneur, right? That says, well, how do I, from a marketing perspective, how do I get in front of these customers? Because that's really what it is. But to shift the language so it doesn't feel quite so money oriented. You do need to pay the bills. You need to pay your staff, but you're also, again, the business is to help women. And so it's a blended vision, which obviously takes a lot of work, but it sounds like what you said, once you really identified who do we want to work with, how do we get in front of them, then it really, the floodgates open. And I remember even before I moved from Colorado, you were expanding across the state.
Yeah. There's a huge need for it. And I think that, again, that's the opportunity, right? It's like, sure, a lot of this can come from all right, well, we need clients to keep the doors open and do this work. But luckily, what is best for the client is best for the business, always. And sometimes it's easy for, I think, providers to lose track of that, but it always is the truth. So more clients is, whatever barriers we can remove to treatment allows more people to receive treatment, and they need it. So wherever we can meet them is what's going to be helpful. And I think that that's constantly the goal, is how do we bring this to more people? And even if they're not coming through the doors, how do we bring more information to people? How do we help, shift some of these perspectives that people have? And I think, we just continue to expand our accessibility to people. And I think another piece in that is my own conception of well, who needs help? And I think in the beginning it was well, people suffering from drug and alcoholism, and then it's well, what's suffering? Whose level of suffering is the most important? And I think, we can really get caught in oh, well, these people need the most help. But it's well, if we can also swim upstream a little bit. I remember hearing a quote by Nelson Mandela that was at some point when you just see bodies floating down the river, it might be a good idea to walk upstream and see where they're getting thrown in. And it's even if we are going toward people who have, maybe a higher bottom, it's well, isn't there a dignity in that as well of kind of intervening a little bit earlier in the problem and providing that compassion to not wait till people slide all the way down the scale till rock bottom where they lose all their resources, their health is suffering. It's I think what we realize is that it's benefits more than just our numbers and our census. It's we're actually being more proactive about this problem in a country where I think we're really socialized to be reactive to problems and symptoms and not focused on treating a root cause.
Yeah. Insurance doesn't like proactive treatment approaches.
They actually hate it, which is another funny thing with the ACEs study, but I know we're running short on time, but we could go all day about their complicity in this situation that is going to bankrupt them as well. So
I think we're going to have a 2.0 conversation just to talk about that, because it really is the conundrum, right? Like if you're in a place and you are asking for, if you're vulnerable and saying, I'm struggling, right? But you're also not at your rock bottom, right? Like your threshold is higher and you're able to see that this is going to get worse if I don't tackle whatever, again, the root cause right now. Yeah. But unfortunately, not everybody comes with this bottomless, pocket of money, and treatment is not cheap, not because programs are trying to rip people off. It's, we have to pay the right people that are trained and certified and ethical and all of, the list goes on. But anyways, I digress. Like I said, I think we'll have to have a separate conversation just about this.
Right. I agree.
Okay. Well, Holly, thank you for taking the time to share about your story personally and professionally. We'll make sure we have your contact information for you and Denver Women Recovery in the show notes so people can reach out. Again, I know that there's going to be somebody listening to this. And in fact, the majority of my listeners are moms. So when I think about like who is needing support for themselves or for their young adult, hopefully your story, I know I'm saying hopefully, but I know your story will resonate with others. And so thank you again for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And our team is always great at talking with anybody. So even if, anybody hears this and feels like we're not the ones to maybe come to our program, we're always, we take it upon ourselves to make sure people always find the right fit too. So please always call. We want to be here to help people. And thank you so much for having me on. It's always great to see you.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guests for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.